This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there and welcome to Global Business Africa. We'll be giving you insight into Africa's business and financial markets. I'm Uche Okoronkwo, coming to you from Kenya's capital, Nairobi. Let's start with a look at the markets. Now, emerging market stocks rose to a one-month high today after the United States and China agreed to a new round of trade talks. Trade-sensitive tech companies led gains on MSCI's emerging market stock index. Over in South Africa, we saw the JSE was boosted by the positive turn of events. Mainly the banking sector and resources led those gains today. Now, also coming up on the show, South Africa's finance minister calls for unity as the continent embraces the new free trade area. China and the US are set to resume trade negotiations in October. And these Nigerian farmers are bringing in some sweet profits from their bitter leaves farming project. Now, South African Finance Minister Tito Mboweni has called for solidarity amongst Africans as the continent enters a new trade era. While tensions have been running high between South Africans and migrants from other African countries in the last few weeks, Mboweni has assured the world that the recent xenophobic attacks are not the sentiments of the majority of South Africans. CGTN's Sumitra Naidu reports from Cape Town.
Africa is entering a new era with the new Continental Free Trade Agreement in place. The fourth industrial revolution is also taking shape, but animosities between South Africans and others on the continent are souring sentiment.
It's a huge development in Africa. I think probably the most biggest thing that has happened since post-colonial societies in Africa. If we want the free movement of goods, goods don't walk on their own. Goods are moved by people. So therefore, the free movement of people is a logical conclusion. We are all Africans, and we need to begin to inculcate within ourselves that mentality that we're all Africans. These artificial barriers that we have created and this hatred amongst ourselves must really be a thing of the past.
Leaders at the World Economic Forum have been discussing ways of increasing intracontinental trade while capitalizing on the digital revolution.
Technological advances offer great hope for accelerating progress towards the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Digital technology is connecting people across the world instantaneously and provides access to information and services at very low cost. In the last 10 years, millions of people in developing countries have opened their first financial account thanks to digital ID and mobile technologies. Digital access can improve the quality of education, where qualified teachers are not readily available. People living in areas without medical services now have access to healthcare providers via remote digital devices, thus preventing the toll of disease burden on the poor, but especially on our women and our children.
As African countries, we must take advantage of the opportunities presented by the technological changes to enhance our competitiveness in the global landscape. This rests on our ability to adapt and to evolve.
But the United Nations warns that it could backfire if effective policies are not properly implemented and managed.
Despite the increasing availability of new technologies, people living in poverty still don't fully enjoy the benefits. The world has a new dimension of inequality, the digitally empowered on the one hand and the digitally deprived on the other. Globally, again, women are disproportionately represented in the digitally deprived, leading to a significant loss of opportunity for them.
Much is being done across the continent to embrace the digital era, but African governments will need to unite in order to grow and drive a successful fourth industrial revolution. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
Now, one of the major themes at this year's World Economic Forum for Africa is improving infrastructure for the fourth industrial revolution. South Africa has announced the launch of a new affiliate center in light of this. The center will act as a focal point for South African stakeholders to discuss 4IR and its applications. Here's CGTN's Yolisa Njamela with more.
There's great enthusiasm for the fourth industrial revolution here in South Africa. South Africa has recently joined China, Japan and India in hosting a center affiliated to the World Economic Forum Center for the fourth industrial revolution. The center is being established to prepare South Africa for the fourth industrial revolution. The center's objective is to bring together business leaders, governments, startups, civil society, academia, and international organizations to co-design and pilot innovative new approaches to policy and governance in the 4IR. But outside of that affiliate center, are we as a country ready for the 4IR?
We're getting the country ready to make sure that it can have a meaningful impact. Most importantly for us is to make sure that people do not only get to be consumers of technology, but they also get to derive an economic spin-off, which is why we've decided to invest a lot in skills, both for the employed and unemployed. That's one thing, because if we are to have people that must be innovative, people that must drive the software that the fourth industrial revolution is about, they must know how to. But most importantly, the people have to map out their own niche in the fourth industrial revolution.
In April this year, President Cyril Ramaphosa appointed 30 people to the Presidential Commission on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. The commission will assist government in taking advantage of the opportunities presented by the digital industrial revolution. The task of the commission, which will be chaired by the president, is also to identify relevant policies, strategies, and action plans that will position South Africa as a competitive global player.
If you want to be the hub of Africa, we've got to make sure that we have all the relevant skills that must not only feed to South Africa, but they must also feed into Africa. But most importantly, we've got the best energy sector in South Africa. We've got the best mining sector in South Africa. And now as I'm talking to you, we are changing the laws. We are creating incentives, and we are working on strategies that must say we're enhancing investment call. We build more innovation centers to encourage young people to be innovative and be able to come up with solutions that must take South Africa to a higher level.
The impact of 4IR is expected to be felt throughout all sectors of the formal economy, and government wants to ensure that all sectors are ready. Earlier this year, South Africa's cabinet approved the white paper on science, technology, and innovation. It identifies 4IR as a key focus. Many critics point out that the advent of 4IR contains many dangers such as unemployment, monopolies, and private infringement, to name a few. Still, they all agree that everyone should embrace it, as it has become and will continue to be a feature in all our lives. Yolisa Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, let's continue our look at Africa's readiness for the fourth industrial revolution. Up next is Tanzania. Many local entrepreneurs in the East African nation are embracing the shift, but they're still hoping for more support from their government. Here's CGTN's Daniel Kijo with more.
2 years ago, Toolboxy started as a platform that linked households with workers to do various repair and maintenance services. Now it connects players in the construction business to get labor, materials and equipment, all done with a click of a button. The founder says his platform has already facilitated over 3,000 transactions, and it's only getting smarter.
Each time you visit our platform, the platform learns your habit and where are the places that you visit. So the next time you come there, you will find everything that you want on the first page without even searching.
The company is an example of a shift that some are calling the fourth industrial revolution. It's a movement towards innovative advancements in technology to simplify the way we live and work. This startup hub in Dar es Salaam wants to encourage local companies to embrace the movement.
And we wanted to be part of that and also impact the innovators who are trying to take us through the generation. So Seed Space Dar es Salaam offers a platform and a space for these innovators to try out new ideas and test the new technologies.
In a developing nation like Tanzania, access to affordable technology and chances for innovators to connect with one another are important to keep up with the global pace. Centers like Seed Space here in Dar es Salaam provide an opportunity for local startups in the information and tech space to get funding to develop their ideas further. But many experts in Tanzania say it must find a way to radically change its governance and education systems to place fourth industrial revolution technologies at the center of its recent industrial drive. This founder of a fintech app believes the country needs policy changes to attract investors and school curriculums that encourage people to explore opportunities in technology.
My hope is that, whether it's government or whether it's the private sector, they start looking at these opportunities as places to learn and be ahead versus pulling up barriers and putting up laws that withhold like creativity, disruption, and using technology in enhancing these services.
Local entrepreneurs are determined to help Tanzania become a part of the fourth industrial revolution. But as the country embarks on its industrialization drive, they hope the infrastructure will be in place to help the country transform its economy. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
Well, let's move on now. Trade volumes between China and Africa are yet to surpass the high of $15 billion hit in 2014. Now, last year, the value of imports and exports between the two sides was just over $204 billion. What has changed, however, is the volume of non-oil exports from Africa to China. Last year, economies on the continent exported goods worth just under $99.3 billion. That's 30.8% more year on year. Well, CGTN's Ramanyang caught up with Alibaba's Vice President for Global Initiatives at the World Economic Forum on Africa for a review of the performance of the firm's operations on the continent through its first participating country, Rwanda.
What that means is governments, private sector, and civil society should all come together to work towards common goals, but also coordinate their efforts. Because in this sort of period now, there's increased interest and excitement in what digital Africa can become in light of the Continental Free Trade Agreement. But the real sort of challenge here is how do you coordinate those efforts so that we can be most efficient but also achieve the greatest outcome for everyone that wants the same thing.
So is this essentially like essentially bringing Alibaba's tools into the African market and saying, look, this is what we're capable of doing, and this is a platform where you guys can trade, whether it's a rice farmer in Nigeria selling to someone else in Mali or Senegal and something like that?
Well, not only tools, but even more important is the knowledge and experience that we've acquired from our 20 years of experience in China. A lot of what we're doing now is actually capacity building for entrepreneurs, for university curriculum, also even governments, to share our experience in China in building a digital sort of ecosystem in that region. And then allowing the entrepreneurs here to see what is possible so they have the confidence, they have a basis of comparison, and then they make the right choices for Africa to build Africa's digital. Yeah.
Right. The Electronic Trade World Platform, the ETWP.
EWTP.
EWTP,
Yeah.
There you go. It's a bit of a confusing acronym. Launched to a lot of fanfare in Rwanda last year. Interesting platform, essentially allows direct exports of produce from Rwanda into China. Fairly straightforward, but so far I've only seen it in Rwanda. What's the plan to scale it up?
So the idea with the EWTP is to create hubs around the world that facilitate e-commerce trade and simplify the process, especially for small, medium-sized businesses. So what we hope to do is that through these hubs, that businesses of all sizes can leverage e-commerce and export their products or import products. Rwanda is the first country we've selected in Africa to do this. We have other hubs in Malaysia, in Belgium, and in China, and many more to come. But the idea is to really test, how this works here in Africa, to see, number one, how we implement this. Also, really learning from that experience what are the challenges that Africa faces specifically so we can focus on the right areas. So Rwanda specifically, in training, we've worked with government ministries to share our experience from the digital economy. We've worked with entrepreneurs, we've worked with the local traditional businesses, but also the university education system.
Why was Rwanda picked as one to start with in Africa? Because I mean, looking at it from a different perspective, some would argue, you've got big economies. You've got Nigeria, you've got South Africa, you've got Kenya and East Africa.
I think that we felt that Rwanda, in terms of the leadership, they had a mutual willingness to try this. I think there's a lot of fear about what e-commerce and technology could potentially bring to a community, to a society, increased competition, loss of jobs, data management issues. I think these are all real challenges, but a government that is open to trying to develop this also recognizes how you mitigate the risk while achieving the greater benefits. Rwanda is a small country, but it's extremely efficient. It's extremely kind of transparent in how kind of business is done, and I think that people, whether they're the local businesses or they're sort of Pan-African businesses, they would feel comfortable using that as a hub for some of their, sort of digital economy activities as a starting point. Now, if Rwanda is a great success, or if and when, then I think it also builds confidence in the larger sort of African market.
Now on tonight's corporate headlines, Kenya utility Kenya Power has committed a $6.7 million budget to develop its hybrid power generation systems. Now the project covers 23 mini-grids. The decentralizing of power stations will offer new opportunities towards providing secure and reliable electricity in areas not served by the national grid. And South Africa's Denel is eyeing a deal worth almost $2 billion over the next 2 years. The strategy will aid in the firm's recovery after struggling to pay salaries and relying on bailouts. Of course, Denel recently received a $118 million cash injection from the government in order to stem the deepening liquidity crunch. And South Africa's Sanlam could invest in Egypt in the next year. That's following a boost in its interim results on the back of its Pan-African strategy. The country's largest insurer reported a 32% drop in profits due to one-off costs, including a $111.6 million expense related to a Black Economic Empowerment transaction and a $13.5 million amortization charge. And lastly, a U.S. court has rejected ExxonMobil and Royal Dutch Shell's effort to revive a $1.8 billion arbitration award against the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation. This follows a dispute over a 1993 contract to extract oil near the Nigeria's coastline. Now, the firms have accused NNPC of unilaterally lifting more oil than was contractually allowed, depriving them of billions of dollars worth of oil. And that's a look at our corporate headlines. Well, let's head into a quick break now, still to come on the show. Nigeria uses tax credits for private firms in order to boost its infrastructure. And Tunisia sees significant growth in its pharmaceutical sector.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global business, only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay, we'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible? And why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Uche Okoronkwo. Hello, Naro.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and Global Business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN. Welcome back. Well, let's head to Nigeria now. The country is using a system of tax credits to encourage private companies to share the cost of infrastructure projects. Now, the move is part of a drive to diversify Africa's biggest economy away from its reliance on oil. The country's Federal Inland Revenue Service says more than 10 local companies have applied for the scheme to receive 50% of expenditure in tax credits. Nigeria has a target to nearly double its tax revenues this year due to a surge of new payers following the end of an amnesty program and the introduction of a new database that uses biometric data.
Slowly but surely we're getting there. There are a lot of little businesses that may charge VAT are not remitted or may not even be charging VAT. And we're focusing first of all on the bigger, larger businesses. Especially when you look at the situation whereby the economy has just come out of a recession. We want to make sure that we do not burden the small business owners. Personally, I believe that Nigeria should review the VAT rate, maybe to 7.5%. I've often said it. That will still remain one of the lowest in Africa. Our neighbors close by in Ghana, South Africa, across Africa, have an average of at least 15% when it comes to VAT.
Well, let's delve further into Nigeria's plan to overhaul its national tax policy. We're joined now by Deji Badmus, who joins us in Lagos. Deji, great to have you on the show as always. Now, according to the government, 2 firms have successfully applied to receive this new tax credits so far. So give us a sense of how exactly this new system will encourage private businesses in the country to share the cost of infrastructure projects.
Well, first, you have to look at it from this point, Uche. Look, business organizations in this country, I'm talking about business, corporate organizations, know that one of the things actually impeding their operation here is a lack of infrastructure. So if they have this system now that the government is proposing and the government has actually put on the table to say, look, do fix the infrastructure in your area, and 50% of the expenditure you'll get as in tax rebate. So it's just it's a no-brainer that a lot of them would embrace it, and that's the reason why we have seen these 2 companies now apply for it. And I think others would, of course, be waiting to see how everything pans out, how everything works out, before more embrace the deal. Because, look, before now, even before the government announced this initiative. We've had situations where private organizations actually go out of their way to fix the infrastructure around where they are based just to ease the business they do, and in return they get nothing. And now that they're going to be getting something, there's no question at all that more of them would embrace it. I mean, we're beginning to see it work. We know that a part of the Aliko Dangote conglomerate has actually signed up to it, and they're actually working to fix the road around the port area in Lagos here. So it's something that I think is very good, and I think as we go forward, more companies will definitely come forward and sign up to it, and no question at all that it will be to the benefit of everyone, including the government, of course, because fact is that as we speak today, the government hasn't got the resources, to address the country's infrastructure deficit. So it makes sense now to get the private sector involved and then give them some incentives now, like what it has announced.
Now, of course, the government also says this new system is part of a drive to diversify Nigeria's economy away from its reliance on oil sales. Now, data from FIRS shows that since 2016, non-oil tax collections have been rising steadily. Give us a sense of the extent of the improvement.
Well, there's no question at all that we've seen improvement in non-oil tax collection, no doubt at all. But what we have seen too, Uche, is that, tax collection now from oil has actually been going down, of course, as a result of the drop in oil price. And of course, as you know, from 2014 or between 2015 and 2016, we also saw let's say from 2013, actually, we saw a drop now in production level. So it tells you that, look, even though we're trying to diversify the economy and concentrate on those, the non-oil sector, the fact is that this economy is still oil-driven. It's still reliant on oil. So while we have seen non-oil tax collection now gone up, the downside is that the collection from oil tax is actually pulling the country down. Right. For instance, I'll give you a typical example. Between 2012 and 2014, the government, for instance, made just around 42% in terms of non-oil tax collection. But from 2016 to 2018, we saw a jump to around 60%. But despite that, because we're not making substantially from the oil side, it's actually pulling the economy down. And that's why it's still very important that the price of oil climbs up and that production level continues to stay or probably go higher than they are now. Because if you do not have that situation, then no matter what you collect from non-oil tax, it just might not be enough to get this economy moving, because what you get there is actually not quite massive, not as massive as what you would get from the oil side.
Well, let's look at the overall picture as it pertains to non-oil revenues and oil revenues. This government did promise that it will nearly double tax revenues this year from 2018. Has that been successful?
I don't think so. I mean, we actually haven't seen it. You just have to look at the budget. Budget 2019 is still a deficit budget. The government would still need to borrow more. As we speak today, the government, it's become very glaring because we're moving towards the end of the year now. It's become very glaring that the government would certainly not be able to meet its revenue target. So you have this revenue shortfall like we had it in 2018 and 2017. So yes, as I said before, we are seeing increases in terms of non-oil tax collection. But the fact is that in terms of budgeted targets now, when we talk about revenue, we're just not meeting it, and that's just the truth. We have this revenue shortfall. And another thing we must understand, Uche, is that, look, tax collection itself, it's a function of the economy. If the economy is not doing very well, it's difficult to see how you can make enough tax. But if the economy is doing well, then you're absolutely sure that, for instance, your collection from VAT will definitely go up. collection from company income tax will sure go up. Yes, we've had a situation where the number of tax-paying adults has actually gone up. We understand it's 20 million now. The FIRS boss said they're looking at 45 million. But the fact is that if the economy is not doing very well, it will be difficult. It's difficult to see how you can get people to pay their tax. And we're talking about personal income tax here. And if companies are not doing well, there's just no question at all that tax collection in terms of company income tax would definitely be low. So it's easy to say that this is your projection. You're going to double, tax collection, or you're going to double revenue collection this year. But the reality on the ground does not suggest those targets are attainable.
Right, and you're quite right, because the NESG actually says 81% of Nigerians and businesses don't pay income tax. Well, the government still is considering a new national tax policy. In fact, a committee has been set up. They will be presenting a finance bill to the Minister of Finance. What do you expect to come out of that, and how soon will we see this enforced?
Well, first, how soon? I think probably before the end of this month, or maybe the end of this month, because the technical committee of that committee itself actually held they held a session, I think yesterday or so, and they made it very clear that before the end of the month that they'll be coming out with their report, and that they will be sending a bill to the Minister of Finance proposing to harmonize all the taxes in this country, because as you know, there's been this long complaint of multiple taxation in the country. So one of the proposals that will be coming out of this committee is the harmonization of taxes in the country. And there's also the likelihood that would see a recommendation, as we had, of course, the FIRS boss say there in that interview, that VAT would be increased by probably 2.5%. And what we have also heard is that there would be some sort of pronouncement now on the issue of the taxes now, that multinationals pay, especially when it comes to, profit shifting now. I mean, tax shifting and tax-based erosion. So we're waiting for all of that. We're waiting for the report, so to speak. When that report comes out, we'll have a clearer idea, but it's certain that we'll have some kind of tax harmonization, and I think it's beginning to look that like we're going to have an increment now in VAT. I mean, it's what the government has always said for a very long time, that the VAT in this country is the lowest on the continent, so there's a likelihood we're going to see that. But we have to wait until the committee comes out with a full report. But don't forget, too, that whatever report it comes out with will be a recommendation to the Minister of Finance. And that report will still have to be debated at the Federal Executive Council. And whatever the Federal Executive Council comes up with would have to be sent to Parliament so that Parliament would now put all of those recommendations now. They become law before implementation. So give or take, we still have, some way to go as to get this thing resolved, because lawmaking process here, as you know, takes a long time.
Right. Well, as always, great to have your insights on the show, Deji. Of course, that was Deji Badmus joining us there in Lagos. Well, let's move on now to Tunisia. The country's pharmaceutical sector has experienced a robust growth of between 10% to 15%, attributed to an increase in domestic demand for drugs. Well, the government is now planning to capitalize on the manufacturing base in a bid to improve access and expand export of pharmaceuticals to African countries. CGTN's Anand Shaushi has the details.
According to the World Health Organization, Tunisia's pharmaceuticals industry generated $745 million in 2015, with local production accounting for 60% of the domestic market's needs in terms of volume and 47% in terms of value.
In 1989, Tunisia opened the door for the private sector to invest in the pharmaceutical industry. Now, we have 47 pharmaceutical manufacturing companies, which cover 50% of domestic demand and 65% of the volume of local consumption. Now, we'll boost export to Europe and Africa.
In partnership with the Ministry of Health, the private sector aims to increase the volume of exported pharmaceuticals to Africa.
The state is determined to accompany the main actors in this industry to increase production capacity for exports. As economies grow, the demand for imported pharmaceutical products is on the rise in Africa. Tunisian companies can meet this growing demand.
Several Tunisian companies are investing in research and development in the pharmaceutical industry in Cameroon, Côte d'Ivoire, Senegal, and Sudan.
Tunisia's pharmaceutical industry is one of the most successful in Africa. Tunisian professionals and investors are using their experience, know-how, and financial means to enter and to increase their presence in the African market.
Tunisia's National Council of the Order of Pharmacists called for the establishment and implementation of the legal and policy measures that will stimulate drug production and research in the next decade. The Tunisia Africa Business Council announced that a medical mission is visiting Conakry, Guinea this week. The mission is intended to boost health cooperation and to increase the exchange of medical staff and paramedics, as well as the export of pharmaceuticals. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
You're watching Global Business Africa. We're heading into a quick break now, still to come on the show. China and the US are set to resume trade negotiations in October. And Saudi Arabia breaks ground on a mega entertainment park right outside of the capital, Riyadh.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant. Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what do you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's recap today's top headlines this hour. South Africa has temporarily shut down its diplomatic missions in Nigeria. Now, this follows revenge attacks on South African-owned businesses in the West African nation. The government has also admitted that prejudice is partly to blame for the riots against foreigners in South Africa that have affected businesses in Pretoria and Johannesburg. And the United Nations says it will remain in Libya despite the bombing in August, which killed 3 UN staff members and injured 2 others. There are concerns that the conflict will continue if external factors, which are trying to end the conflict, no longer participate in finding a resolution. And lastly, South Sudan has announced that revitalized transitional government of national unity will be formed on November 12th. The UN recently organized a peacekeeping event aimed at promoting peace following the signed agreement in September 2018. And that's a recap of your headlines this hour. Well, on the international front, China and the United States have agreed to hold another round of trade talks in October. The Chinese Commerce Ministry's announcement came after a phone call between Vice Premier Liu He, U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer, and U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin. The preparatory negotiations will offset the trade dispute following the imposed additional tariffs on both countries' goods. Well, China has officially lodged a complaint over America's actions with the World Trade Organization.
The U.S. tariff measures targeting Chinese imports seriously violate the rules of free trade and the multilateral trading system. China's complaint against the U.S. at the WTO is a bid to protect the country's legitimate rights and interests and to defend the multilateral trading system.
Now, the ongoing trade war has impacted a wide range of businesses, some more directly than others. The American trucking industry is vital to the transport of U.S. products for export, and as CGTN's Dan Williams reports, they're taking quite a hit.
Early morning in Woodstock, Illinois, and Chris Dahm is preparing to move a batch of soybeans. Dahm Trucking has been in operation since 1980. The company specializes in transporting agricultural products, but business has been down in recent years.
You wake up every morning and you can get depressed very easily.
The trade dispute between the United States and China has severely impacted the US agricultural sector, and in turn, that has had a knock-on effect on the US trucking industry.
What we're seeing now is a lot less commodities being sold by the farmers because they're holding on for better prices, and so our volume of freight to haul, as far as grains and agricultural commodities, is way down.
US agricultural exports to China have been cut in half since the trade war began, according to the American Farm Bureau, from nearly $20 billion in 2017 to just over $9 billion in sales last year.
Trucking companies that specialize in moving agricultural products are on the front line of the trade dispute between the United States and China. They're feeling the pinch now, but industry officials predict there may be more pain down the road, spreading to truckers hauling all types of goods.
Hoffman Transportation is a trucking company that specializes in transporting plastic products. It says, as yet, the business is showing few signs of a downturn. But Don Schaefer, the executive vice president of the Midwest Truckers Association, says it is inevitable that the trade dispute will impact other sectors.
What happens in China, the uncertainty with trade negotiations, has a direct effect of trucking. It trickles down. So if you look at all that, people say, well, it doesn't affect me. Oh, yes, it does. The ripple effect's going to hit you, too.
The US trucking industry faces a number of challenges in the coming years, not least the potential impact of advances in vehicle automation. But for many, the focus remains on the now and weathering a trade dispute that shows few signs of being resolved anytime soon.
Sometimes we have to say enough's enough and try to get something settled, and also maybe not with just China, but some of these other export countries that we do, we need to really get on their good graces and try to, promote our products.
The US trucking industry has proven to be resilient over the years, but the road ahead appears far from certain. Dan Williams, CGTN, Woodstock, Illinois.
Well, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he'll do everything in his power to make sure that the UK leaves the EU at the end of October. Well, Johnson made the statement while at West Yorkshire. The Premier has had a bruising week in the wake of his defeat in a Parliament where he lost his working majority. This was followed by the resignation of his brother, Joe Johnson, earlier on Thursday.
And I'm going to do everything I possibly can to make sure that this country comes out of the EU on October the 31st. But unfortunately, Parliament voted yesterday effectively to scupper our negotiating power and to make it much more difficult for this government to get a deal. So what I want to do now is to really give the country a choice. We either go forward with our plan to get a deal, take the country out on October the 31st, which we can, or else somebody else should be allowed to see if they can keep us in beyond October the 31st. And I have to tell you, I don't think that would be the right way forward. And I think if people really think that this country should stay in the EU beyond October the 31st, then that really should be a matter for the people of this country to decide. Because at the moment, what Parliament is voting for, or Parliament voted for yesterday, was a system by which the EU itself would decide how much longer we had to remain in.
And heading to Saudi Arabia now, as part of the country's Vision 2030, the kingdom has now begun construction on a mega entertainment park right outside of the capital, Riyadh. It is called Al Qiddiya, and it's all part of the oil-rich nation's plan to diversify itself away from fossil fuels and focus more on culture and recreation to drive growth. Take a look.
If you are impressed by the size and scale of Disneyland or Universal Studios, wait till you see Qiddiya. Backed by the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia, the $8 billion project will include 28 big entertainment facilities and is expected to break 12 world records. That will include the world's highest, longest, and fastest roller coaster with instant speed as fast as 250 kilometers per hour. The park is located 40 kilometers away from Saudi's capital, Riyadh, and will satisfy the need of locals craving for entertainment.
We have a huge market. Our residents are very enthusiastic about such a theme park. We will build hotels and facilities for the visitors. Our goal is to attract our people back to Saudi Arabia to consume at this park.
80% of entertainment activities of Saudis are happening outside of the country. The decision by Saudis to seek out entertainment venues elsewhere is estimated to cost the kingdom $30 billion a year. This one-of-its-kind theme park is definitely aimed to reverse that. Vision 2030, announced in 2016, and the broader framework that Qiddiya is in, has made culture, tourism, and entertainment as pillar industries. Hundreds of billions of dollars will be poured in to developing theme parks, island tourism, and desert adventures.
We will come up with laws and regulations in this area. We are very confident that our country will show competitive edge in tourism and entertainment industries. We will not only draw our citizens back, but we will lure hordes of tourists from other parts of the Arab world.
Song Yaotian, CGTN.
Well, on that note, let's take a look at how commodities performed today. Oil slipped towards $60 a barrel, and that's after a report showed that U.S. crude inventories rose unexpectedly, although hopes of progress in resolving the U.S.-China trade war did lend some support. While Brent crude climbed 1% on the day. Meanwhile, gold prices retreating as investors booked profits. That's after the metal rallied to a 6-year peak in the previous session, and hopes of a thaw in U.S.-China trade ties did spur some demand for riskier assets today. Well, let's head into a quick break. Still to come. These Nigerian farmers are chasing on their bitter leaves farming project. And South African showcases digital artists and their contribution to the economy.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Now, in Nigeria, locals of Anambra State are investing their time and energy into bitter leaf farming. Now, the leaves are used to make the popular bitter leaf soup, locally known as onugbu soup, a local delicacy. Now, our correspondent Deji Badmus interacted with a community in the southeastern side of the country who earn a living by farming and processing the leaves. Let's have a listen.
Savoring a meal of bitter leaf soup, popularly called ofe onugbu, among the Igbos of southeast Nigeria. No traditional ceremony is ever complete among the Igbo tribe without a serving of onugbu soup, and local farmers are now leveraging on it big time to make a living. A community of bitter leaf farmers washing their harvest at a river bank at Oruku in Anambra State, southeast Nigeria. This is effectively where the journey of the bitter leaf soup begins. Many of these people grew up watching their parents plant and sell the leaves to earn a living, and today they do the same for their own survival. Stanley Ojukwu is one of the biggest bitter leaf farmers in the community. His farm is so big that he had to employ some local folks to work for him. He's come here to pick up some of the harvest while new cultivations are taking place at the same time.
This is our business. This bitter leaf, we don't have season. It's not seasonal. It's only that during this rainy season, the work is lesser because you don't have to irrigate the farm. You don't have to water the farm. Rain fall constantly. But the work during that dry season, it pays more than this rainy season because that is when you get the fruit of your labor.
Even though it's the peak of the rainy season here when the bitter leaf business is a bit slow, activities at the river bank where the leaves are processed are not slowing down. Like other bitter leaf farmers in the community, this is where Stanley brings his harvest for processing. And processing involves washing and squeezing the leaves very hard to remove the bitter taste. It's a lot of hard work and could last for hours, but these women are happy doing it.
This is what feeds my family and sends my children to school. And from the proceeds of this business, I am now preparing to build my own house in my village.
Off-takers are usually on standby to buy off the processed bitter leaves from the farmers and take them to neighboring cities and beyond. This is just one bucket of bitter leaf. As Stanley says sometimes they could sell up to 100 buckets in a day.
Because of money, lack of money, we don't produce the much we can. We haven't expanded this business to our expected point.
Most of the bitter leaves from this community are finding their way to Nigerians, especially from the Igbo tribe and the diaspora. It's part of what is sustaining bitter leaf farming communities like this one, where the crop is cultivated. But farmers like Stanley say he would like to get directly involved in exporting the product and cut off any middleman so that he could make more money and expand his bitter leaf enterprise. Deji Badmus, CGTN, Oruku, Southeast Nigeria.
Now, digital innovation has become a key focus for African cities as we move towards a smart future. Well, the 10-day Fakugesi Festival underway in Johannesburg showcases the work of digital artists, their contribution to the economy, and the role they play in coming up with solutions to social challenges. Here's CGTN's Julie Shire with more on that story.
Digital art is becoming serious business. Creatives gathered at the Fakugesi Festival to explore how their work can further improve the lives of South Africans and others on the continent.
We call ourselves a development festival in many ways because we have workshops, we have free talks programs, we have critical discussions about the industry in different kinds of ways. But we know that everybody who comes to this festival will either walk away with a new skill or a new network. So it's important for us that that happens locally so people can have access to it.
So when you have festivals like this where you can incorporate all sorts of arts, which is very much forward-looking, you know, to say that we are incorporating arts, we're incorporating innovation, where we're taking this in the future. And knowing the influence, as I said, that the arts has on culture, and you merge those two together, I just think that it is an absolutely beautiful thing.
The 10-day event taking place at Sihomolong, a high-tech incubation hub for entrepreneurs, filmmakers and artists, is an innovative space that is also used to train students and young people who are unemployed.
We're still a little bit of a fledgling industry. We're still developing. There are a lot of problems we need to solve. Diversity, women, the artistic palette and the artistic influence of Black, Indian, colored, female, all have a different palette to just your white male. So I think as we broaden that diversity, South Africa is really going to show just the incredible artistic gifts that we have that are gems all over the country.
Young Africans are embracing the fourth industrial revolution with ease, and tech-savvy innovators are rising to the challenge of finding smart solutions for challenges on the continent.
Because we're looking at this festival as a platform, to promote digital transformation. Even if the approach that this festival is taking, looking at the interface between arts and innovation using digital platforms, for us that's also still important, because the whole digital transformation theme needs to be experienced right across our society. So as a city that is also going through digital transformation towards becoming a smart city,
Johannesburg is positioning itself to go fully digital by 2040. Festivals such as Fakugezi brings together artists and ideas which can help fast-track that vision. Chilishara CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, before we go, a quick look at Africa's currencies today. Kenya's shilling weakening on the day. Now, traders say that was due to surging dollar demand from the energy and manufacturing sectors, as well as excess liquidity in the money markets. Meanwhile, South Africa's rand continuing to rally today as positive global developments boosted sentiment. Now, traders say we could see the rand possibly testing the 14.7 rand per dollar level, but the true test is whether this is only a good news story that will be temporary or if there is a deep-seated correction of the currency on the way. Well, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. Remember, you can send your feedback to the contacts on your screen. You can also follow us on our various digital media platforms. From me, Uche Okoronkwo, and the rest of the team, thanks for watching.